The comparison happens at 10:47 hours, September 18th, 1972, Camp Eagle, Thu Thien Province. 18 North Vietnamese women POWs being processed through American facility before repatriation. Standard procedures, standard documentation, standard medical screening. Except what happens when US Army Specialist Robert Chen, age 24 processing clerk, reaches across the desk to hand the first woman her documentation forms. Except what happens when she, Nguyen Thi Mai, age 22, stares at his forearm extended toward her and freezes completely. Except what happens when she whispers in Vietnamese to the woman beside her. Words the interpreter translates immediately. "Look at his arm. Look how big his arm is. It's bigger than my leg." Chen has no idea what to make of this reaction. He's just handing her papers. And she's staring at his arm like she's never seen a human arm before. He looks down at his own forearm. It's just a normal arm, average for an American man his size, nothing remarkable. But the Vietnamese women are staring at it like it's something extraordinary, something shocking, something that contradicts everything they expected. This is the story of September 18th, 1972, when 18 Vietnamese women POWs encountered American soldiers for the first time and couldn't stop talking about their arms. Not about weapons or tactics or military bearing. About arms. About the physical size difference between Vietnamese women and American men. About Americans being so much larger than propaganda prepared them for. About arm circumference teaching more about physical reality versus propaganda claims than any words could convey. About the shocking discovery that Americans aren't just taller, they're built completely differently, with muscle mass and body structure that makes Vietnamese women feel impossibly small by comparison. If you want stories about propaganda's physical lies collapsing through simple observation, where body size contradicts systematic teaching and physical comparison reveals truth, hit subscribe. Because what happens when these 18 women encounter Americans whose arms are bigger than their legs reveals everything about what propaganda taught versus what reality showed. About enemies who are physically enormous when propaganda promised they were unremarkable. About Americans whose casual physical presence makes Vietnamese women feel like children by comparison. About the power of direct physical observation to shatter carefully constructed beliefs about enemy characteristics. About how Americans, just being themselves, normal-sized American men maintaining normal American physiques, contradicts years of propaganda through the most basic visual comparison. What they were taught about American physical size. Before understanding the women's reactions, you need to understand what they were taught to expect. What propaganda promised about American physical characteristics. What years of political education prepared them to see when they encountered enemy soldiers. The senior woman among the prisoners, Thi Hanh, age 31, former NVA communications officer, can explain the propaganda lessons precisely. She attended hundreds of political education sessions during her military service, including specific instruction about American physical characteristics designed to prevent Vietnamese soldiers from being intimidated by enemy appearance. Political education session number 56, standard curriculum throughout NVA. Americans are not physically superior to Vietnamese people. Reports of American size differences are imperialist propaganda designed to intimidate revolutionary forces. Americans are approximately the same height and build as Vietnamese. Any perceived differences result from better nutrition due to stolen wealth from colonized peoples, not from actual physical superiority. Vietnamese revolutionary spirit overcomes any minor physical advantages Americans might possess through exploitation. Vietnamese soldiers should not fear American physical appearance, because Americans possess no inherent physical superiority. Revolutionary consciousness defeats capitalist physique. This was propaganda, systematic lies designed to prevent intimidation, to make Vietnamese soldiers feel equal physically to Americans despite observable size differences, to attribute any differences to temporary nutritional circumstances rather than fundamental biological variation between populations, to ensure Vietnamese soldiers wouldn't feel physically inferior when encountering Americans in combat, to maintain morale through denying physical reality. Hanh believed this teaching completely. She taught it to others under her command. She prepared soldiers to encounter Americans who would be approximately Vietnamese-sized, perhaps slightly taller due to better nutrition, but nothing fundamentally different, nothing inherently superior, nothing intimidating about their physical presence. She described Americans as normal-sized humans who Vietnamese soldiers could match physically through revolutionary spirit and tactical superiority. She taught lies, well-intentioned lies designed to maintain morale, but lies nonetheless. She believed them because she'd never met Americans to test those claims against reality. She taught what she was taught, believed what propaganda promised, prepared soldiers for American physical characteristics that matched propaganda descriptions rather than actual reality. Now she's about to encounter actual Americans. Now propaganda meets observable physical reality. Now taught expectations collide with visual evidence. Now everything she taught, everything she believed is about to be tested against the most basic human assessment, looking at someone and seeing their actual size. 10:47 hours, the comparison that changes everything. Chen reaches across the desk to hand Mai her documentation forms. It's a simple gesture, arm extending, papers being offered, professional courtesy, nothing unusual from American perspective. But from Mai's perspective, a Vietnamese woman who stands 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighs 98 pounds, who has never seen an American in person before, who was taught Americans are approximately Vietnamese-sized. Chen's extended forearm is shocking in ways she can't immediately process. His forearm is enormous. Not compared to other Americans. Compared to Americans, it's completely average, unremarkable, normal for a man his size. But compared to Mai's forearm, compared to her leg, compared to any part of her body, Chen's forearm is massive. It's thick with muscle definition visible even at rest. It's long, extending far across the desk. It's covered with dark hair that Vietnamese men rarely have in such abundance. It's everything propaganda didn't prepare her for. Mai stares at that extended forearm and her brain tries to process what she's seeing. She instinctively compares it to her own body. His forearm, just his forearm, not his whole arm, is bigger around than her thigh. His wrist is thicker than her ankle. His hand could probably wrap completely around her upper arm. The size difference is so dramatic that it triggers almost instinctive response. This person could hurt me very easily if he wanted to. She doesn't reach for the papers. She just stares at his arm, unable to process the size difference, unable to reconcile approximately Vietnamese-sized with the reality of an arm bigger than her leg. She whispers to Pham Thi Lan beside her, her voice showing shock. "Look at his arm. Look how big it is. It's bigger than my leg. Propaganda said Americans are normal size, but his arm, just his arm, is bigger than my entire leg. Why didn't they tell us? Why didn't they prepare us for this?" Lan looks at Chen's arm, makes the same comparison to her own body, reaches the same shocking conclusion. She stares at her own thin arm, malnourished from months of inadequate food, lacking muscle development, small bone naturally, and then looks at Chen's forearm again. The comparison is devastating. His forearm has more muscle mass than her entire arm. His forearm is bigger around than her calf. His forearm looks like it belongs to a completely different species, not just a different nationality. Chen notices they're staring at his arm rather than taking the papers. He doesn't understand why, doesn't know about the propaganda they were taught, doesn't realise that his normal American arm is contradicting years of political education about American physical characteristics. He just thinks maybe they're nervous about being processed, maybe they need reassurance, maybe he should be more gentle in his approach. He speaks softly through the interpreter. "It's okay. These are just documentation forms, nothing scary, just basic information we need for your repatriation. Would you like me to explain what each form is for? But they're not listening to his words. They're still staring at his arm. Mai finally reaches out to take the papers, and when she does, her hand looks impossibly small next to his. Her fingers are thin and delicate. His fingers are thick and strong. When she takes the papers from his hand, the size difference between their hands is so dramatic that she almost pulls back instinctively. She returns to her seat holding the papers, still processing what she saw. Lan whispers urgently, "Did you see? His hand made your hand look like child's hand. The size difference is... I've never seen anything like this. Vietnamese men are not built like this. Even big Vietnamese men are not built like this. Americans are... They're enormous, not just tall. Built differently, more muscle, bigger bones, everything larger. Why didn't propaganda tell us? Why did they say Americans are normal size?" A third woman, Thi Hanh, age 28, leans in to whisper, "I'm looking at all the Americans in this room. They're all like that. All of them, not just him. Every American soldier here has arms bigger than our legs. Bodies built with muscle we've never seen on Vietnamese men. Size difference so dramatic that we look like children next to them. This isn't about nutrition. This isn't temporary. This is fundamental physical difference between populations. This is what propaganda tried to hide by saying Americans are normal size. They're not normal size, they're enormous." The whispering spreads through the group as each woman is processed by American personnel, each woman making the same observations, each woman reaching the same shocking conclusions. Americans are not approximately Vietnamese-sized. Americans are dramatically larger, taller, broader, more muscular, built on completely different scale. The physical comparison is so stark that it makes Vietnamese women feel tiny, fragile, almost child-sized next to normal American men. And this comparison, this visual evidence contradicting propaganda, is impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away, impossible to reconcile with years of teaching that Americans possess no physical superiority over Vietnamese. The medical screening, measurements don't lie. US Army doctor, Captain Sarah Mitchell, age 30, conducts medical screening with professional thoroughness. Part of standard screening involves basic measurements, height, weight, vital signs, simple documentation, standard procedure. Except what becomes obvious during measurement process is how dramatically different Vietnamese women's measurements are from American personnel conducting the screening. The contrast becomes unavoidable, undeniable, documentable in precise numbers rather than subjective impressions. Mitchell measures Mai first. Height, 4 feet 11 inches. Weight, 98 pounds. Measurements recorded clinically. Normal for Vietnamese woman of her age and background. Healthy weight for her height. Nothing concerning medically. But then Mai looks at Mitchell. American woman, age 33, 5 feet 8 inches tall, athletic build, 145 pounds. Even American woman is dramatically larger than Vietnamese woman. Mitchell is 9 inches taller despite being the same species, same gender. Mitchell outweighs Mai by nearly 50 pounds. The female-to-female comparison removes any explanation about male-female size differences and makes the population difference starkly clear. Mai speaks through the interpreter, her voice showing confusion. "You're very tall, very substantial. I feel small next to you, like child next to adult. But you're woman like me, same gender, yet you're so much larger. Whoa." Propaganda said Americans are normal size, said any differences are minor and due to temporary nutrition advantages. But you are not slightly taller. You're dramatically taller. You have so much more muscle. Your arms are bigger than mine, even though you are woman. This is not temporary nutrition difference. This is fundamental physical difference. Why did propaganda lie about something so obvious? Mitchell considers how to explain this honestly. Different populations have different average body sizes due to genetics and environment developed over many generations. Europeans and Americans of European descent tend to be taller and have more robust builds than many Asian populations. It's not about superiority, just biological variation between groups adapted to different environments over thousands of years. Nutrition does play a role, but genetics determines baseline potential. My ancestors came from Northern Europe where larger body size was advantageous for survival. Your ancestors adapted to Southeast Asian environment where smaller body size has different advantages. Neither is superior, just different. She continues gently. Your propaganda probably minimized these differences to prevent your soldiers from being intimidated. If soldiers believe enemies are physically much larger and stronger, it can affect combat psychology and morale. Propaganda told you Americans are normal size, so you wouldn't feel physically intimidated. But that was a lie about observable reality. Americans are significantly larger on average than Vietnamese. That's just measurable fact. Doesn't mean Americans are better, just bigger. Size isn't everything in combat, but yes, Americans are physically larger. And yes, that difference is dramatic when you see it in person for the first time. Another woman during her examination, Nguyen Thi Mai, age 25, asks the question they're all thinking. The men are even bigger than you. American men make us feel impossibly small. Their arms are bigger than our legs. Their hands make our hands look like children's hands. When we stand next to them, we barely reach their chest. Size difference makes us feel vulnerable. Makes us understand that if an American soldier wanted to hurt us physically, we could not resist. We are that much smaller and weaker. That's frightening realization. That's what propaganda tried to prevent us from realizing by claiming Americans are normal size. Propaganda tried to prevent intimidation by denying physical reality. Now we see reality, and we understand why they lied. Mitchell nods, understanding the psychological impact. I understand why that's frightening. Yes, average American man is significantly larger and stronger than average Vietnamese woman. That's observable fact. But here's what's important. American soldiers are trained to follow laws regarding prisoners. Geneva Conventions prohibit abuse regardless of physical capability. Size difference doesn't matter legally. You're protected by law, not by being physically equal. American military takes those legal protections seriously. You're safe here despite size difference because law protects you and American military follows law. Does that make sense? Bin processes this. So Americans acknowledge they are physically larger and stronger, but claim legal protections prevent them from using that advantage to harm prisoners? We should trust law rather than fearing physical capability? Mitchell responds firmly, yes, exactly, trust law. American military follows Geneva Convention strictly. You're safe here because law protects you and we follow law. Physical size is irrelevant when law and honor govern behavior. That's what civilization means. Law governing behavior rather than physical strength determining outcomes. The women process this explanation while continuing to observe American personnel whose physical presence makes them feel tiny by comparison. They are learning that Americans acknowledge physical differences honestly rather than denying them. That American military follows laws protecting prisoners despite physical capability to harm them. That civilization means law mattering more than strength. They're learning through contrast between propaganda denying reality and Americans acknowledging reality while following legal protections anyway. The comparison they can't stop making. During processing breaks, the women gather in a holding area where they can see American soldiers moving around the facility. They can't stop watching, can't stop comparing, can't stop discussing the physical size difference that propaganda never prepared them for. Han, the former communications officer who taught propaganda, speaks quietly to the group. I taught you that Americans are approximately our size. I taught that revolutionary spirit overcomes any minor physical advantages. I taught lies. I didn't know they were lies. I believed them completely. But they were lies nonetheless. Look at Americans. They're not approximately our size, they're dramatically larger. Their arms are bigger than our legs. Their bodies have muscle mass we've never seen on Vietnamese men. The physical difference is so extreme that we look like children next to them. She continues, emotion building, and I understand now why propaganda lied. If we'd known Americans are this much larger and stronger, we might have been intimidated, might have felt inferior, might have hesitated in combat. Propaganda denied physical reality to maintain our morale and combat effectiveness, but lies don't help when you eventually encounter reality. We're encountering reality now. Americans are enormous compared to us. That's truth propaganda tried to hide. Another woman, Thi Hanh, age 23, adds, but here's what confuses me. Americans are enormous and could easily overpower us, but they haven't. They're following laws protecting us. They're treating us gently despite being able to harm us easily. Their size makes their gentleness more noticeable. When someone that much larger than you treats you carefully, you notice the carefulness more because you're so aware of the size difference and what they could do if they chose to. American soldiers are being careful with us, moving slowly, speaking defiantly, not using their physical size to intimidate, being gentle despite disadvantage. That gentleness despite capability that's character, that's honor, that's choosing to be careful with vulnerable people even when you don't have to be careful. Lan agrees. I noticed that too. When that big American soldier, the one with arms bigger than my entire body, when he helped me up the stairs, he took my arm so gently, like he was afraid of hurting me, like he was very aware that he's strong and I'm fragile, and he needs to be careful. He could have grabbed roughly, could have jerked me around, could have used his strength carelessly, but he was gentle, deliberately gentle. That gentleness requires awareness and choice. He's choosing to be careful with people smaller and weaker than him. That's character. They watch American soldiers moving around facility, big men moving carefully in space containing much smaller people, big men being deliberately gentle in interactions, big men aware of their size advantage and consciously choosing not to use it carelessly or cruelly. The women are learning that American size makes American gentleness more meaningful rather than less meaningful. That being gentle when you're enormous requires more conscious choice than being gentle when you're small. That Americans choosing carefulness despite size advantage reveals character more clearly than if Americans were same size as Vietnamese. Mai speaks quietly. Propaganda lied about American size to prevent us from being intimidated. But if propaganda had told truth, we would have learned something more important. Americans are much larger and stronger, and Americans choose to be gentle anyway. That combination, size plus gentleness, reveals honor more clearly than either alone. Americans are strong enough to be cruel but choosing to be kind instead. That's more impressive than if they were our size and kind. Being kind when you're powerful enough to be cruel, that's real honor. That's real character. That's what propaganda denied us learning by lying about American size. The photograph that captures everything. Before repatriation, American personnel take documentation photographs, standard procedure for prisoner records. The photographs will document prisoner condition, treatment received and compliance with Geneva Conventions, standard protocol. But when the photographs are taken of Vietnamese women standing next to American personnel for scale reference, the images capture the dramatic size difference visually in ways that become evidence of propaganda failure. One photograph shows Mai, 4 feet 11 inches tall, standing next to Sergeant James Wilson, 6 feet 3 inches tall, and 215 pounds of solid muscle. The size difference is so dramatic that they barely look like the same species. Wilson's arm, hanging casually at his side, is visibly larger in circumference than Mai's thigh. His hand is nearly twice the size of her and his shoulders are 3 times broader than hers. The visual comparison makes Mai look like a young teenager standing next to an adult man, not an adult woman standing next to an adult man. Mai looks at the photograph after it's developed and processed, seeing herself captured on film standing next to Wilson. She stares at the image with tears forming. This photograph shows truth propaganda tried to hide. Look at the size difference. Look how small I am next to him. Look how his arm is bigger than my leg. Look how his hand makes my hand disappear. This is visual evidence that Americans are not approximately Vietnamese-sized. This is proof that propaganda lied about observable physical reality. This photograph teaches truth in a way words cannot. She continues, emotion building. But look at his face in this photograph. Look at his expression. He's smiling, gentle smile, kind eyes, standing next to a tiny woman who barely reaches his chest. And he's being careful not to stand too close, not to loom over me, not to use his size to intimidate. You can see in his posture that he's aware of size difference and being careful about it. You can see gentleness in how he's standing. This photograph captures both truths. Americans are much larger than we expected, and Americans are gentle despite that size advantage. Both visible in one image. That's powerful evidence of American character. Multiple photographs show similar dramatic size comparisons. Vietnamese women looking impossibly small next to American personnel. Arms bigger than legs, hands twice the size, height differences of over a foot. Visual evidence that contradicts propaganda claims about American physical characteristics. But every photograph also shows something else. American gentleness. American personnel standing carefully, not looming or intimidating. Expressions showing kindness rather than dominance. Body language communicating respect despite physical superiority. The photographs capture both size difference and behavioural choice. Americans being large and Americans choosing to be careful with people smaller than themselves. The women will carry these photographs home. Visual evidence of two truths. Propaganda lied about American size, and Americans proved honourable despite size advantage. Both lessons visible in images that cannot be dismissed or explained away. The question about Vietnamese men. During evening meal after processing is complete, the women eat together in a dining facility under American supervision. They are discussing everything they observed, everything they learned, everything that contradicted propaganda. Huang raises a question that several women have been thinking. American men are much larger than Vietnamese women. But are American men also much larger than Vietnamese men? Or is this a male-female difference rather than population difference? Han considers, I've seen Vietnamese men my whole life. I've seen large Vietnamese men, strong Vietnamese men, well-fed Vietnamese men. The largest, strongest Vietnamese men I've ever seen are still smaller than average American men here. American men are not just larger than us, they're larger than Vietnamese men too. This is population difference, not just gender difference. Americans of both genders are larger than Vietnamese of both genders. Even American woman doctor is taller and more muscular than most Vietnamese men I know. She continues, and I think that's why a propaganda lied so carefully about American size. If Vietnamese soldiers knew that American men are dramatically larger and stronger than Vietnamese men, it would affect combat psychology. Vietnamese soldiers would feel physically inferior, would question their abilities to defeat Americans in close combat, would be intimidated by physical disparity. Propaganda denied that disparity to maintain Vietnamese combat morale, told us Americans are normal size so we'd feel equal physically, told us revolutionary spirit overcomes physical advantages so we'd fight confidently despite being physically smaller. Lies designed to maintain fighting spirit. Nha asks, but Vietnamese soldiers who fought Americans, they saw the size difference. They knew Americans are larger. How did they maintain morale after seeing reality contradict propaganda? Han responds, some denied what they saw, convinced themselves that specific Americans they encountered were unusually large rather than admitting all Americans are large. Some attributed American size to temporary nutrition advantages rather than fundamental population difference, maintaining belief that with better nutrition, Vietnamese would equal American size. Some focused on Vietnamese victories proving size doesn't guarantee victory, using tactical success to offset psychological impact of physical inferiority. And some, she pauses, some lost morale. Some became convinced Vietnamese cannot defeat Americans physically. Some surrendered rather than fighting when confronted with much larger American soldiers. Size difference did affect combat psychology despite propaganda trying to prevent that effect. The women processed this understanding. Propaganda lied about observable reality to maintain morale. Reality contradicted propaganda when soldiers encountered actual Americans. Some soldiers found ways to maintain beliefs despite evidence. Some adjusted beliefs to accommodate reality. Some lost morale completely when reality contradicted promises. Propaganda failed in multiple ways because propaganda cannot overcome direct observation indefinitely. Mai speaks quietly. We're learning truths propaganda tried to hide. Americans are much larger than Vietnamese. That's observable fact. But we're also learning that size doesn't determine character. Americans being large doesn't make them cruel. Americans being strong doesn't make them abusive. Americans having physical advantage doesn't mean they use that advantage to harm. Size reveals capability. Behavior reveals character. Americans have capability to harm us easily, but are choosing not to harm us. That choice reveals honor more clearly than if they lacked capability. Being gentle when you're powerful, that's real honor. The repatriation and the truth about size. 2 days later, the women are ready for repatriation. They've been processed, documented, medically screened, and thoroughly photographed, showing their condition and treatment. They're noticeably healthier than when they arrived. Adequate food, medical care, and humane treatment producing visible improvement in short time. Captain Mitchell meets with them before departure. You're being repatriated today. Transportation is arranged. Before you go, I want to acknowledge something directly. You were surprised by American physical size. You were taught Americans are approximately Vietnamese-sized, and that teaching was false. Americans are significantly larger on average than Vietnamese. That's observable fact based on population genetics. I'm sorry propaganda lied about something so easily verified through observation. Physical lies like that undermine trust in all propaganda claims. But I hope you also learned something else. Physical size doesn't determine character. Americans being larger doesn't make Americans better or worse people, just larger people. What matters is behavior, not capability. Americans have physical capability to harm prisoners but choose to follow laws protecting prisoners. Americans have size advantage but choose to be gentle anyway. That choice reveals character. Size reveals capability. Behavior reveals honor. You experienced both American size and American honor. Remember both lessons. Han responds for the group. Captain Mitchell, we learned both lessons. We learned Americans are much larger than propaganda claimed. We learned that propaganda lied about observable physical reality. We carry photographic evidence of size difference that contradicts propaganda claims. We will testify that Americans are not approximately Vietnamese-sized. Americans are dramatically larger. That's truth propaganda tried to hide. But we also learned Americans are gentle despite size advantage. Learned Americans are careful with people smaller than themselves. Learned Americans choose honor over capability. Learned that being strong doesn't mean being cruel. Learned that size advantage can coexist with gentle treatment. Learned that Americans being enormous makes their gentleness more meaningful rather than less meaningful. Those lessons about character matter more than lessons about size. We carry both truths home. Mitchell nods. Good. Carry both truths. Teach both truths. Let people know propaganda lied about American size, but also let people know Americans with size advantage chose to follow laws and honor anyway. That second truth matters more than the first. Size is just biology. Honor is choice. Americans chose honor. That's what matters most. The women board transport carrying photographs showing size difference and carrying testimonies about gentle treatment despite size advantage. They leave as witnesses to two truths that propaganda tried to prevent them from learning together. Americans are enormous and Americans are honorable, both observable, both experienced directly, both impossible to deny after seeing and experiencing them personally. They leave changed by learning that enemies are much larger than promised and much more honourable than propaganda claimed. They leave carrying evidence that contradicts propaganda physically and behaviourally. They leave ready to teach both truths. Americans are big, Americans are gentle, because both together reveal character more clearly than either alone. Today, the women who remember American arms. Nguyen Thi Mai is 75 years old now, living in Hanoi, retired from administrative work. She teaches cultural studies part-time, emphasizing physical anthropology and population differences. September 18, 1972 is her primary example of propaganda failing through observable evidence. She tells students, "I was taught Americans are approximately Vietnamese-sized. I believe this completely. Then I met Americans and discovered their arms are bigger than my legs. That visual comparison destroyed propaganda instantly. My eyes taught truth that contradicted years of lies. Americans are dramatically larger than Vietnamese on average. That's genetic reality. Propaganda lied about observable physical fact. But I also learned Americans are gentle despite size advantage. When that enormous soldier took my arm to help me, his arm bigger than my entire body, he was so careful, so gentle. He could have hurt me easily but chose to be careful instead. That gentleness despite capability revealed honor. Size showed capability. Behavior showed character. Americans chose honor despite having size advantage. That choice matters more than the size difference itself. I teach students now. Propaganda often lies about enemy physical characteristics to prevent intimidation. Claims about strength, appearance, anything that might make enemies seem physically superior. But physical lies fail immediately when you meet actual people. Your eyes teach truth about size. Your experience teaches truth about behavior. I learned Americans are enormous through observation. I learned Americans are honorable through experience. Both truths matter. Both contradict propaganda. Both deserve teaching. Multiple women teach similar lessons. Han teaches military history in Hanoi, emphasizing how propaganda about enemy physical characteristics fails upon contact. Huang teaches nursing in Da Nang, using size difference as example of biological variation between populations. Bin teaches sociology in Ho Chi Minh City, analyzing how size disparity affected Vietnamese combat psychology. 52 years of testimony. Thousands of students taught. Truth spreading that propaganda lied about American size, while Americans demonstrated honor despite size advantage. Physical evidence contradicting physical lies. Behavioral evidence teaching character. Both preserved through decades of teaching. The numbers: September 18th, 1972, 18. North Vietnamese women POWs, processed average height of Vietnamese women, 4'11". Average height of American male personnel, 6'9". Average height difference, 13 inches, observable size comparison. American male forearms larger than Vietnamese female thighs. Propaganda claims contradicted 100%. Physical measurements documenting population differences. Vietnamese women, average weight 95 to 105 pounds. American personnel average weight 170 to 200 pounds. Muscle mass comparison. American personnel 2-3x Vietnamese women. Hand size comparison. American hands approximately 2x Vietnamese hands. Visual evidence photographs showing dramatic size disparity. Behavioral observations. American personnel gentle despite size advantage. 100% careful handling of smaller prisoners, documented consistently. Awareness of size difference affecting behavior. Observable in all interactions. Choice to be gentle despite capability. Universal among the American personnel. Long-term impact. 52 years of testimony about size difference and gentle behavior. Multiple women teaching about population variation and character choice. Thousands of students learning propaganda lies about observable reality. Truth spreading that Americans are large and honorable. Evidence that size capability doesn't determine behavioral character. 18 women, one forearm extended. Immediate recognition that arm is bigger than leg. Complete contradiction of propaganda through visual comparison. Days of processing while observing enormous Americans being gentle. Photographs capturing size difference visually. Complete understanding that propaganda lied about size, while Americans demonstrated honor despite size advantage. Propaganda promised normal size, reality showed enormous disparity. Teaching said approximately equal. Observation proved dramatically different. Lies claimed no physical advantage. Truth showed significant size difference. But behavior proved size doesn't determine character. Big arms, gentle hands, large bodies, careful movements. Size advantage, honor chosen anyway. Americans being enormous, Americans being gentle, both true simultaneously, both teaching important lessons, both contradicting propaganda while proving character. Everything learned from arms bigger than legs, everything taught through size comparison, everything validated through gentle behavior despite capability, everything proving propaganda lies while character shows through choice, size observed, honor experienced, truth taught, propaganda defeated, everything, forever.